Hi students, this is the second video here. So we're going into the benefits of biodiversity. So why do we care about biodiversity at all? It's is make sure that you sort of think about this as this is the human benefits from it. We don't always think of the environment as just benefiting humans, right? If we just did that, obviously we would run into some issues, right? Because some of the benefits of humans is like getting money and having creature comforts, and that's not always helpful for the environment. So take this with the understanding that it's from the human perspective. So there's a lot of different benefits. Some of them are creating food stability. The more biodiversity you have, the more stability you have with food. So food sources that are more potential new food sources are listed here in this picture, for example. The capybara is the largest rodent, and it is obviously potential for food. We also have a lot of pharmaceuticals that come from plants. I've seen upwards of 90% of all the pharmaceuticals were derived from animals and plants in the world. So we want to have a diversity of, um, of life on Earth so that we can continue to find new sources of, um, of medicine for people. Bioprospecting is the act of seeking out and finding new organisms. And it's really quite interesting. We hear this all the time in the environmental science community of organisms being found still. The greatest frontier is the deep sea right now. And if you were lucky enough to find an organism, you can actually name it. It's really fun. And these are the particular animals that have great benefits to us in terms of medicinal uses, but are extremely threatened. I want to note the horseshoe crab. This is a particular organism that is helpful to humans and is local to us here in Connecticut. And this particular organism has been shown to have a number of antibodies that help, and also their cells from the blood can help to detect things like um, cerebral meningitis in people. It's really cool. Other types of services that the biodiversity provides. Obviously, we just said food and medicinal purposes, but also help to pollinate plants and create stable climates, reducing droughts and floods. I'm thinking more particularly about like trees and a variety of trees and plants. Waste decomposition. If you think about fungi and bacteria and plants, they do that. Um, Again, plants and trees with air and water purification. Controlling pests and diseases. We want to make sure that we have enough biodiversity to lower the number of mosquitoes and other organisms that carry diseases and things. And we want to have enough genetic diversity for crop variety. Um, so it helps to maintain ecosystem function. So if you have more biodiversity, you have more resilience in your ecosystem, which means that you can withstand disturbances and recover very quickly from stress. As we heard in Mr. Rohde's speech today, it's really important to have resilience, not just as a person in this remote learning world, but also as an ecosystem to be able to bounce back. And biodiversity is very important. Important terms here are keystone species and ecosystem engineer. Keystone species are typically top predators that are really important. And when they're removed, we often see what's called a cascade event, where if they're removed, then the next animal in the food chain is impacted, the next one's impacted, the next one's impacted. So they have a relatively large impact on the whole ecosystem. An example is the wolves in Yellowstone, and they were just put back um, less than 15 years ago. And it's amazing how much of an impact that has on increasing actually biodiversity by having those predators. And the other ones are ecosystem engineers, like beavers, for example. When they're lost, they structure the ecosystem. So when we lose those organisms, we have a very different ecosystem in general. Biodiversity boosts economies through tourism and through recreation. So, have you ever traveled to a place and appreciated the natural beauty of it? Have you ever been an ecotourist and gone on a kayak tour? Or have you ever gone to a park and gone for a walk? A lot of the things that we experience and enjoy about nature are there because there's a rich biodiversity there. And we appreciate that. And sometimes we don't even have to pay for that. It's just something that we appreciate. And imagine a world where we would not be able to appreciate that. In general, you probably have also had this feeling too of having an emotional bond to a particular place outside, whether it be on a park bench in a park or just simply in your backyard or um, um, you know, or it could be something crazy like a national park or deep sea diving or things like that. When you have that feeling, that attachment to nature, we call that biophilia. And biophilia is the love of nature. And again, it's a value, it's a benefit of having biodiversity. We know that it reduces your emotional stress and angst and anxiety, particularly felt by younger people. So, when you have a stress on the environment, there are certain organisms that are considered to be winners and some that are considered to be losers. Um, and that's not to be funny or anything, but the winners, particularly, are generally the generalists, which means that they can survive a wider range of conditions. And when we stress an ecosystem, it typically harms specialists. So specialists can't survive as well when there's a stress and there's something removed that they need, mostly because specialists typically have a thinner or narrower range of food and habitat they can live in. For example, here, the common house mouse is a perfect example of a generalist. It's fast reproducing, it's small, it thrives on buildings and places that are going to be around for a long time. Whereas a tiger will have a very small range of area that it lives in. It's slow reproducing, it's large, and so it's going to have a tough time if there isn't ecosystem stability. So again, thinking about the importance of biodiversity and protecting it means you're protecting those specialists. So when we have biodiversity loss, we also have population declines as well. Um, Generally, as the population decreases, you're decreasing genetic diversity. As we said in the previous video, or decreasing uh, uh, population, like in the panthers of Florida or the cheetahs, will actually have a problem where you have inbreeding as a result of it because there's just not enough organisms to have more biodiversity outside of the brother or the sister organism of the one reproducing. The Living Planet Index was produced by the United Nations Environment Program, and it's a way of tracking the biodiversity. And it fell by 52% in between 1970 and 2010, last 40 years. mostly because of the biodiversity loss. And we know this, extinction is irreversible. Extirpation is essentially an extinction, but only in a particular area. So it's not a full species extinction. It's just the loss in a particular area. For example, we have only a few places where black rhinos exist here today. And they've been extirpated from certain areas, and that extirpation has caused us to worry about their extinction. We know that extinction actually happens naturally. It's a natural process. It happens all the time. And it typically happens because over a very long time, the environment naturally changes and it puts more stress on certain organisms, and so they become extinct. But because of the increased rate of change in the habitats, we're seeing a mass extinction, something that's much higher than the background rate of extinction. These are the five known mass extinctions that have happened in history, and some of them, all of them, have had great, huge impacts on biodiversity. The current one right now is 100 to 1,000 times greater than the background extinction rate. Particularly, it's impacting amphibians and North American birds, like the ivory-billed woodpecker. And to help us figure out which organisms are the most threatened, the International Union of Conservation of Energy has created and maintained the red list, which is the species facing the highest rate of extinction, or risk of extinction, sorry. Mammals, as I said, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish all have a really high threatened rate of extinction.